Harlequin Audio is proud to bring you Until You Loved Me, a Silver Springs novel by Brenda Novak, performed by Veronica Worthington. Prologue. Wincing against the glare of the sun that slanted through his front windshield, the man drove slowly through Bel Air, California. There was so much money in this area, he couldn't even afford to pay the rent on his dumpy one-bedroom apartment. And yet these people owned estates that sprawled over half an acre. Didn't seem fair. The baby he'd put in the seat next to him, only a few hours old and wrapped in a tattered blanket, began to squirm. It wasn't in a carrier, he didn't own one. He wasn't about to spend good money on something he wouldn't need. "Don't you cry," he muttered under his breath. "Don't you dare cry." He couldn't tolerate that sound. It was like nails scraping down a chalkboard. He had to get rid of the child before it started to make noise. Noise would draw too much attention. He'd intended to take it to the far corner house. He'd been to that mansion twice before, and thought the woman who lived there might be empathetic enough to take in an abandoned baby. But the needy infant was already waking up, so he pulled over immediately, looked both ways on the quiet summer street, and grabbed the squirming bundle. It took only a few seconds to stash the newborn under the closest privacy hedge. He didn't dare go any closer to the house surrounded by that hedge, couldn't waste the time, or he'd risk being seen. The neighborhood was quiet in mid-afternoon, but there were always service people coming and going. He heard the baby start to fuss, which only made him move faster. After jumping back into his vehicle, he took off. Chapter 1. 32 years later. "You look miserable!" Ellie Fisher forced a smile for her oldest friend. "What? No, I'm not miserable at all," she had to shout over the music pulsing through the air and reverberating off the walls and ceiling. She'd never understood why, in a place designed for singles to meet and become acquainted, the music had to be so loud. 120 decibels made it almost impossible to have a conversation, and had to be damaging their hearing, but she didn't say that. She knew how Amy, her friend since early childhood, and Amy's friend Leslie, whom she'd just met tonight, would react. Besides, after the emotional trauma she'd been through in the past week, she wouldn't have felt much better anywhere else. "I'm having a great time." Amy pursed her lips. "Sure you are." After being inseparable in grade school, she and Amy had grown apart in middle school and taken very different paths. Amy had been the stereotypical cheerleader, popular, outgoing, and fun, and had opted for cosmetology school instead of college. She now worked at an expensive hair boutique in Brickell, a neighborhood in downtown Miami. Ellie had never received the same amount of attention, especially from boys, but until recently she hadn't cared about that. She'd always preferred her studies to parties, had been her high school valedictorian, and was accepted into Yale, where she'd done her undergraduate as well as postgraduate work. Since leaving school, she'd been determined to overcome the immunology challenges associated with finding a cure for diabetes. Her favorite aunt had lost a leg to the dreaded disease, and now she worked at one of the foremost research facilities in the world, which just happened to be here in Miami, where she'd been born. But thanks to that early bond, she and Amy would always be friends. Ellie had never been more grateful for her than during the past week, since Amy was the one who'd been there when Ellie's world fell apart. "It's true." Ellie glanced from Amy to Leslie as if to say, "Here we are sitting at a tiny table in one of South Beach's most popular nightclubs. What's not to love?" Amy rolled her eyes. "I know you too well to believe that, but I'm not letting you cut out early, so don't start checking the time on your phone. I've invited a couple of friends to come and meet you, remember?" Ellie remembered, but Amy hadn't mentioned any names. Ellie got the impression it was because she didn't know which friend would show up, that she'd simply gone through her male clients and other contacts and invited anyone who might be available. "I wasn't checking the time," Ellie said. Amy scowled. "I saw you." "I was looking to see if my parents texted me. They should have arrived in Paris by now." Ellie wished she'd gone with them. But by the time her life had imploded, they'd had their travel plans in place, and it had been too late to get a plane ticket. They'd be teaching in France for the next year, though, once she finished.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?